Now, one of the principal forms of inflation can be easily seen in the travel industry. You know this. Many airfares have more than doubled. That's a result of higher oil prices, reduced aircraft capacity flying, and a strong pent-up demand from customers released from the COVID shackles. The most senior aviation executive in the world is Emirates President Sir Tim Clark, who was in Melbourne this week. Emirates, of course, has a relationship with Qantas. So when I caught up with the Emirates boss, I asked him about the high fares and when there might be some relief.
We have supply and demand in the whole business, not just out of Australia and in Emirates, standing on its head. So airfares are very high, demand is very strong at those price points. And it is coincidental with the end of the pandemic. So the way I look at it is that we have a sort of glitch in the global economy, which has forced a lot of things to happen. Notwithstanding the level of prices, we've also got high costs in the global economy, whether it be power, whether it be the supply chain factors that are driving up costs, inflation is rising, etc. So there is what I call a disequilibrium in the global economy as we speak. My own view is that that will mitigate over time. Probably by the middle of 24 we'll start seeing inflation. Well, before that we'll see inflation going down, we see interest rates falling down, supply chain will sort itself out, there'll be a restoration of manufacturing, production, shipping, maritime, etc., etc. So when that happens, it's anybody's guess as to what demand may do. My own view is that as costs will fall and inflation starts to fall off and all the bits and pieces I've talked about, there should be a restoration of some kind of equilibrium, the price points that certainly Emirates charges its consumers. And I've always said that the way we run our business is to find the sweet spot between value for money for the consumer as well as the margins we need to provide the products that we do. And we will always chase that sweet spot. So paradoxically, if that means we bring fares down because costs are down, because we've hit that sweet spot that we need to, that's what we will do.
You have been through the pandemic now, been able to build your capacity into Australia from 43 flights a week to 63. You were 77 pre-pandemic. How quickly can you get back to that 77?
Well, we are working on that as we speak. I've still got 380s sitting waiting for maintenance to go through, which is accumulated during the downtime of the pandemic, etc., and the supply chain to get all the bits and pieces. As soon as we get the full contingent of 380s flying, which is scheduled to come up by the end of this year, in the middle of next year, everything will come back to Australia. We also have a fleet of 350s coming in during the course of 24. And I'm looking at all sorts of route permutation which will bring other cities into the mix as well. So we will be going above where we were in prior to the pandemic, 77 a week, hopefully, because we can fly 105 under the agreement.
Yes.
It's a very generous arrangement, and therefore I reckon we can do a lot more with the Australian market than we're doing at the moment. And we're prior to the pandemic.
And what impact will the reopening of China's borders and therefore the reintroduction of flights from China, what impact will that have on the market, on capacity, and therefore presumably on price?
It's likely that there's going to be a lot of demand coming out of China very soon. And when that happens, it may affect the pricing in and out of China. I think a lot of the Chinese business that was coming to Australia prior to the pandemic starting will return, and some. So I think there's going to be, certainly in Southeast Asia, a huge demand for Chinese travel. So what's that going to do? As long as the airlines have inability to meet the capacity requirements to service that demand, it is likely the prices will stay up. That's simple supply and demand. It's not going to be the same kind of situation again in South America or even perhaps North American domestic. But my own view is that restoration that I talked about, equilibrium in the global economy, as a result of this, will probably come back into play about the middle of next year, 24.
So are you worried, does it concern you with inflation rising, with interest rates rising? There is clearly going to be cost of living pressure coming on consumers. Given the fact that travel is one of those discretionary items, does it concern you at some point, with all this capacity coming back into the marketplace, that almost might coincide with households really finding some sort of if you like, a hurdle in terms of how much they can spend on travel?
And that is what I call traditional thinking. Okay, and what we've found is that the discretionary elements of their spend, particularly with travel, has gone to number one. That could be a result of being banged up for so long. So the freedom to move, just freedom, it manifests itself in becoming... So if we get a restoration of where demand for travel, what drives demand for travel and how it sits in a consumer household spend, there could be a restoration of that. I cannot be absolutely sure. The traditionalist in me says, watch out, because that's what will happen. You know, buying a new car because the other one is so clapped out it needs to be replaced is secondary to taking the family on a holiday to get away from the problems that we had. So is that likely to happen? It's anybody's guess. I'll probably tell you that in about 3 years' time.
Yeah, that's right. I was also going to ask you really about aircraft and the way in which they are going to operate in the future. You were one of the real sort of, if you like, supporters of the A380, the super jumbos as they were. Now, many airlines, Qantas included, have gone to the 787s, going for the modern designs and all that type of thing. Just what is the position of the A380 in the world today?
Well, as we know, they've stopped production of it. Yes. We took the last one that came out of the factory. We will keep those flying till the mid-30s if we can. They're supported as they should be, as we agreed with Airbus. The place for the 380, in terms of what it's doing today, is clear to me. We are filling our 380s today. All right, we've talked about artificially inflated demand, whatever it may be, but prior to the pandemic, we were filling our 380s. Because other carriers couldn't manage to do that for reasons of, I don't know what it made, their business model, there wasn't a compelling business case for Airbus to do what they needed to do next, which was partly driven by us, which was to change out the technology of the design, aerodynamics, wing, propulsion, etc., and produce an aircraft that was 15% more efficient than the current one. If you extrapolate global demand based on the reference point of 2019, cut out the pandemic years and pick that up again at a 4% growth, probably 6 to 8 billion people are going to be flying by 2035.
Double the number.
Double. And we don't have the capacity in these smaller twins, hugely efficient, and even the airport capacity to do all of this.
So you think hindsight will say it was a mistake to withdraw the A380 and for other airlines not to support it in a much bigger way?
That's my view, not shared by most of the other carriers who either bought it or chose not to do it. The thinking mind will be saying, hey ho, that's today and that's Emirates, etc. But what are we going to do about global demand in the 2030s if we continue with the airport infrastructures as they are, if we continue with the air traffic control infrastructures as they are, or if we keep the aircraft size down to a 237-seater on a wide-body twin?
So tell me about the relationship with Qantas, your partner here in Australia. The anniversary of that, if you like, that agreement is now almost 10 years old. They're choosing to fly at the moment from Perth direct to London, but in the future they have ambition to fly to New York, to London direct from the east coast of Australia. Do people want to sit on aircraft for 20 hours?
In my view, absolutely yes. I think Project Sunrise will be a huge success once it's up and running. I don't think Qantas will have an empty seat on that. I think they're very strong on the Perth-London operation. So
it will not have escaped your attention that Alan Joyce has been under some public scrutiny, pressure even you could call it, in regards to the, if you like, the way in which Qantas has reacted post the pandemic in terms of its operations. What's your own feeling about Alan's track record at Qantas?
I think Alan Joyce has a track record which is the envy of the industry. He is highly regarded by his industry peer group. He's a great guy. We love him anyway. But in terms of his professional competence, dealing with the things that he did have to deal with, and I can name those, the decisions he took, which were pretty draconian at the time, always putting the commercial interests of the company first and foremost. So he's done right by his shareholders, he's done right, as far as I can see, by the consumers that support him, and under very difficult circumstances. The pandemic was a challenge to anybody of any industry. And it bankrupted many carriers. Alan has had to navigate Qantas through difficult situations, And I think the fact that it's surviving today, it will prosper again. It will definitely prosper again. And I see no reason why he should be challenged, because at one point he was a hero. And now he's a bad guy. I mean, really, that is more the nature, the fickleness of opinion that ebbs and flows by whatever. But in the end, you have a stalwart who's looked after his business, looked after his employees, looked after his brand, and as far as I'm concerned, under the circumstances he's faced, done exactly the right thing.
So Tim Clark, you've been at Emirates since 2005, I think, as chief executive. What? How many more years do you think?
Well, I'm trying to deal with the pandemic and what's been going on with regard to the industry, get the business onto a good, solid footing going forward. And then the question of what I was looking at 3 years ago about exiting the business will probably pop up again then. But my main job is to make sure that Emirates is in good shape going forward, that it has a strong balance sheet, a great product, continues to innovate and expand its operations with the bravery and the boldness that we did in the old days. When I think we've got into what I call that sweet spot, then let others get on with it.
So Tim Clark, many thanks for your time.
You're welcome.